My name doesn't matter anymore. Once I was known in certain circles, a man who had devoted his life to the pursuit of hidden knowledge, the forbidden, the ancient, the things most people feared to even acknowledge. I was not a skeptic. I did not dismiss the supernatural. I embraced it. I sought power where others saw only myth. I performed rituals. I whispered names that had not been spoken for centuries, and I believed that I had uncovered the truth of the universe. I thought I was in control. I was wrong. The night I died, I believed I was ascending. I had prepared for years, crafting the perfect ritual, reaching for something beyond human limitation. But the things I called upon were not what I thought they were. The knowledge I had spent my life chasing was a lie. And the moment I crossed the threshold, the moment I felt my soul being torn from my body, I realized the terrible truth. I had never been the master of these forces. I had been their pawn. And death was only the beginning. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I never feared death. I used to think it was just a transition, a doorway to something greater, something I believed I understood better than anyone. I spent my life studying the occult, diving into the forbidden knowledge that others feared, while people knelt in churches, pleading for mercy from a God I saw as a relic of the weak. I was in candlelit chambers, whispering ancient names, calling upon forces older than history itself. I didn't believe in good or evil. Those were just primitive labels, tools used by religions to control the ignorant. Power was all that mattered, and I was certain I had found the true source of it. I had performed rituals that made seasoned practitioners shudder. I had summoned things that had no place in this world, and I reveled in the feeling of control. People followed me, believing I had some secret wisdom, some connection to the great unknown. They called me a master of darkness, a high priest of forbidden truths, and I believed them. On the night of my death, I stood in my private sanctum, surrounded by sigils and symbols drawn in blood, incense thick in the air, the flickering flames of black candles casting monstrous shadows on the walls. I was preparing for something greater than anything I had ever done before. This wasn't just another invocation. This was meant to be my ascension. I had spent years searching for the final key, the last missing piece that would break the illusion of human limitations. And I had found it, or so I thought. The ritual was precise. Every word of the incantation carefully studied, every movement executed flawlessly. I remember the moment I spoke the final words. The air around me seemed to bend, thickening like liquid, pulsing with something ancient and alive. A presence filled the room, something vast, something powerful. It was working. I felt my body tremble, but I wasn't afraid. Not yet. Then something changed. The presence that had been growing, that had responded to my call, wasn't behaving as it should. It wasn't bending to my will. It wasn't waiting for my command. Instead, it was watching me. The air turned frigid. The candles flickered violently, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I couldn't rationalize. Dread. My mouth went dry as the shadows in the room deepened unnaturally. The symbols I had drawn, the words I had spoken, none of it mattered anymore. I had opened a door, but I wasn't the one standing on the threshold. I tried to move, to end the ritual, to close whatever I had unleashed, but I couldn't. A force, invisible but undeniable, held me in place. Then I heard it. A voice, but not one that belonged to any being I had ever encountered. It wasn't whispering, it wasn't chanting, it was laughing. It was in that moment that I understood. I had been a fool. My entire life I thought I was the master of these forces, that I was the one in control, but I had never been in control, not once. I had been led here, step by step, belief by belief, until I was exactly where they wanted me. The realization struck me too late. The laughter grew, surrounding me, consuming me, and then nothing. A void, an absence of everything. No light, no sound, no time. I was gone, but I was still aware. And that was the worst part. I was dead. I knew it with absolute certainty, yet I could still think, still feel. But there was nothing around me, no ground beneath my feet, no walls, no sky, no stars, just a vast, infinite emptiness, stretching in all directions. It wasn't darkness, not in the way people imagine it. Darkness implies the absence of light, but this was the absence of everything. No sound, no warmth, no air. My thoughts felt like the only thing left of me, suspended in a void where time didn't exist. I tried to move, but there was no body to move. I tried to scream, but there was no voice to scream with. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. Or at least, I thought I was. Then, the silence broke. It started as a whisper, so faint I almost doubted it was real. A soft, distant murmur, like voices carried on a non-existent wind. But as I strained to hear, the whispers multiplied, growing louder, overlapping, layering over each other in a chaotic, inhuman chorus. I couldn't make out the words at first, but the more I listened, the more they began to take shape. They were speaking my name, not just speaking it, hissing it, taunting, mocking. They knew me. They had been waiting. A cold weight settled over me, something oppressive, crushing. The whispers turned to laughter, sharp and guttural, filled with something beyond malice. It wasn't the laughter of men. It wasn't even the laughter of the things I had summoned in my lifetime. This was different. Older. Hungrier. A realization dawned on me, a terrible understanding creeping through the remnants of my consciousness. They had never feared me. I had spent my life believing I commanded these forces, that I had bent them to my will, but the truth was far simpler. I had been tolerated, amused, a child playing with fire, thinking I had tamed it, never realizing that the flames were simply waiting for the right moment to consume me. The laughter grew deafening, reverberating through the void, and then something moved. I couldn't see it, not in the way humans perceive sight, but I felt it. A shifting, slithering presence circling me, enclosing me in something unseen yet undeniable. Shapes stirred in the nothingness, shadows without form, crawling toward me, reaching for me. And then they were upon me. Cold, skeletal fingers grasped at my being, not my body because I no longer had one, but at something deeper, something more fundamental. I felt them burrow into me, peeling back layers of whatever I had become, exposing every secret, every hidden fear, every lie I had told myself. They were inside me, rummaging through my memories like scavengers, picking apart a carcass, and I was powerless to stop them. I saw flashes of my life. Rituals performed in candlelit chambers, my voice chanting incantations with perfect confidence, the faces of my followers, their eyes filled with awe, their minds corrupted by the knowledge I had given them. And then I saw deeper. I saw the first time I had doubted, the first moment I had felt that cold prickle at the back of my neck, the first time I had wondered if I was truly in control. They lingered on that moment, savoring it, as if they had been there all along, watching, waiting for me to realize my mistake. The laughter faded, replaced by a single voice, clear and terrible. "You thought you were one of us?" The question wasn't asked with anger. It was amusement, pity, something far worse than hatred. The shadows tightened around me, and I felt something begin to pull. A force beyond comprehension, dragging me downward into something far worse than this void. I fought against it, but it was useless. I had no arms, no legs, no voice, no weapons. Nothing but the realization that I had been wrong about everything. And then, just as I was about to be swallowed whole, something changed. A light, faint at first, like the first glow of dawn on the horizon. It cut through the void, slicing through the shadows, driving them back with a force they could not resist. The presence around me recoiled, shrieking in a way that wasn't sound, but something deeper, something primal. The weight that had been crushing me lifted, and for the first time since I had died, I felt something close to relief. The light grew stronger, filling every inch of the endless nothingness, pushing back the horrors that had claimed me. And then I heard another voice. One unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't a whisper or a taunt or a command. It wasn't cruel or mocking. It was power, but not the kind I had sought in life. It was a presence, vast and unshakable, and it spoke only 4 words. It is not time. And then everything went white. I expected oblivion. The moment the light consumed me, I thought it would erase everything. The horror, the laughter, the unseen hands that had been tearing me apart. But I was wrong. Oblivion would have been a mercy. Instead, I found myself somewhere else. At first, I couldn't comprehend it. My senses, if I still had any, were overwhelmed. It wasn't just light. It was something more. A presence. Something vast. Something that filled everything, yet didn't suffocate. I wasn't floating. I wasn't standing. I simply was. The oppressive weight of the void was gone, but now I was drowning in something different. Purity. It was unbearable. My entire existence had been steeped in darkness, in rituals, in the belief that I had unraveled the secrets of power, but here in this place I felt like nothing. Every part of me, every thought, every sin, every deception, every twisted justification I had ever told myself, it was all exposed, stripped bare, as if I had never had shadows to hide in to begin with. I tried to turn away, to retreat, but there was nowhere to go. The void had been empty, yet I had felt something lurking within it. Here, it was the opposite. This place was full, overflowing, infinite, but nothing hunted me. No malice, no lurking figures in the dark. Just presence. And yet, that was more terrifying than anything I had encountered before. Because for the first time, I knew. I knew what I had spent my life denying. Then, I saw them. They weren't human, not in the way we think of humans, but they weren't the things I had invoked in my rituals either. No grotesque forms, no writhing shadows. They were radiant, their forms shifting like living fire, yet solid and unbreakable. Their light didn't flicker like flames. It was constant, unwavering, as if it had existed since the beginning of time itself. I knew instinctively what they were. Angels. I had mocked the idea of them my entire life. I had called them myths, remnants of an old faith designed to comfort the weak. But now they stood before me, and I was the one who was weak. I wanted to speak, but I had no words. I had spent my life commanding spirits, summoning forces I thought I controlled, but here, my voice was meaningless. My will was meaningless. They moved without moving. I could feel their attention on me, and I wanted to shrink away from it, but there was nowhere to go. I felt them searching me, not in the way the things in the void had torn through my mind, but deeper, more absolute. They weren't looking for information. They already knew everything. They weren't digging through my memories like scavengers. They were simply seeing me as I was. One of them stepped forward, not because it had legs, not because it needed to move, but because it chose to. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, not in words, but in something that filled me, something I understood not with my mind, but with my entire being. You do not belong here. I had no response, because it was true. I didn't belong here. I had never belonged here. Then the presence changed. It wasn't just the angels anymore. Something greater was approaching. I felt it before I saw it, and when I did, I collapsed. Not physically. I had no body to collapse with, but my entire existence, everything I was, crumbled in its presence. The angels were powerful, terrifying in their radiance, but this was beyond them. A figure stood before me, and I knew. I had called him a lie. I had called him a fabrication, a crutch for the desperate, a delusion for the weak. I had mocked his followers. I had cursed his name in my rituals. I had spat on everything he represented. And now, I knelt before him, without choice, without pride, without the arrogance I had carried my entire life, because I finally understood what power truly was. I couldn't look at him. Not out of fear, not out of defiance, but because I was unworthy. His presence burned through me, not with fire, not with wrath, but with something far worse. Truth. You sought power, he said, and the words weren't words, they were reality. You sought knowledge. You sought to be more than you were. I wanted to beg, to plead, to justify myself, but I had no voice here. And even if I did, what could I say? What defense could I offer? That I hadn't known? That I had been deceived? No, I had deceived myself. You were given the chance to choose, he continued, and the weight of those words crushed me. And you chose darkness. A pause, silence, a judgment I knew I deserved. But then, something else, something I had never expected. But you are not beyond redemption. My entire being shuddered. Not with hope, not with relief, but with something closer to terror, because those words meant I had a choice. And I wasn't sure I deserved one. I wanted to look away, but there was nowhere to hide. His presence was all-encompassing, filling every part of my existence, pressing into the cracks of my soul like light pouring through shattered glass. I had spent my life in darkness, seeking knowledge, believing I had unraveled the hidden truths of the universe, that I had seen beyond the illusions of the weak-minded masses. I had thought myself enlightened, but now, kneeling before him, I understood the depth of my ignorance. Everything I had built, everything I had believed, had been a lie. And then he showed me. It wasn't a vision in the way humans experience sight. It was as if time folded in on itself, and I was thrown backward, not as an observer, but as a prisoner in my own past. I felt it all again, the hunger for power, the intoxicating thrill of bending reality to my will, the arrogance of believing I had mastered forces older than time itself. I saw my younger self poring over forbidden texts, chanting in darkened rooms, drawing sigils in blood while my followers watched in awe. I had laughed at the idea of sin. I had mocked those who lived by faith, calling them blind, ignorant, shackled by superstition, and yet I was the one who had been enslaved. I saw the moment it began, the first time I had ignored the warning signs. That first ritual, when something had responded, something that was not what I expected, something that had watched me with amusement rather than obedience. I had told myself I was in control. I had ignored the cold dread that clawed at the edges of my mind. And they had let me. I was shown every soul I had led astray. Every person who had come to me, desperate for meaning, seeking truth, looking for something beyond their ordinary lives. I had promised them knowledge. I had promised them power. But I had only ever given them chains. I saw their faces, one by one, filled with trust, with devotion, as they followed me deeper into the abyss. Some of them had died believing my words. Others still lived, still trapped in the web of deception I had spun, and I saw what waited for them. They were not free. They had never been free. They had bound themselves to the same forces that had whispered in my ears, the same forces that had laughed when they dragged me into the void. And I had been their willing accomplice. I had been their prophet, their high priest. I had called it wisdom, but it had only ever been damnation. The weight of it was unbearable. Every deception, every lie, every moment of arrogance that had led me here crushed me beneath its weight. I wanted to scream, to deny it, to tell myself that it wasn't my fault, that I had been misled, that I hadn't known. But that was another lie. And here, in this place, lies could not exist. You were given the truth. His voice rang through me, neither angry nor kind, simply absolute. You turned away. I trembled, my very essence unraveling in his presence. There was no argument I could make, no defense. I had always known. Deep down, beneath all the justifications, beneath all the arrogance, I had known. The first time I had called upon them and felt something watching, the first time I had seen one of my own followers consumed by madness, the first time I had dreamed of shadows with too many eyes, I had known, and yet I had chosen to continue. I saw my final moments again, but now with clarity. I had not been ascending. I had not been breaking through the veil to grasp ultimate power. I had been led like a lamb to the slaughter, convinced I was the butcher. The things I had served, the things I had worshipped, had been waiting for that moment, for the final sacrifice. Me. They had never needed my rituals, my knowledge, my will. They had only needed my belief, and I had given it freely. Tears. If I even had tears in this place. Burned through me. Regret was too weak a word for what I felt. Horror, shame, guilt, despair. None of them were enough. I had damned myself. I had damned others, and I could not change that. You cannot undo what has been done, he said, and I felt the finality of it settle into my being. There was no erasing my past, no rewriting the story. But you can choose what comes next. His words struck something deep within me, something I didn't understand. Choice? I had made my choice. I had lived and died by it. What other choice was left? You have seen the truth, he continued. Now you must decide what to do with it. For the first time I felt something new, not hope, I did not deserve hope, but something else. A door that had been closed to me all my life now standing slightly open. A path I had spent my existence running from. I did not deserve another chance, but I was being given one. The weight of his words settled over me, heavier than anything I had ever known. You have seen the truth. Now you must decide what to do with it. The finality of that sentence echoed through every part of my being. Choice. It seemed impossible. I had already made my choice long ago. I had devoted my life to the pursuit of power, to the rejection of everything he represented. I had embraced darkness, not as something to be feared, but as something to be wielded. And yet, despite everything, despite my failure, despite the countless lives I had poisoned with my arrogance, I was being given another choice. I wanted to speak, to ask why, to demand an answer for why I wasn't simply cast away, abandoned to the abyss where I belonged. But I didn't have to ask. He already knew, and instead of an answer, he showed me. The world unfolded before me, not in images, not in words, but in something deeper, something more real than anything I had ever perceived in life. I saw the earth, vast and turning, filled with people, oblivious to the forces that moved around them, through them, inside them. I saw shadows creeping at the edges of their reality, whispering in ears, planting doubts, twisting truths into pleasing lies. I saw entire nations deceived, guided by unseen hands toward destruction. I saw those in power, the ones who believed they ruled, who thought themselves untouchable, nothing more than puppets dancing to a silent melody they could not hear. And above it all, I saw the things I had served, the ones I had called upon not as deities, not as wise and ancient entities, but as parasites. They did not create, they did not rule, they only consumed, and they were feeding. I wanted to turn away, but he did not let me. The vision pressed deeper and I saw what was coming. The end of everything, not in a sudden cataclysmic event, not in fire raining from the sky or the earth splitting open, but in something far worse. A slow, methodical unraveling, a world where truth no longer mattered, where faith was eroded not by force, but by apathy, where people willingly chained themselves to the things that devoured them, believing they were free. I saw a time when the mark of allegiance would not be taken with violence, but with relief, with gratitude, with open hands reaching toward their own enslavement. And I saw those who refused, small, scattered, hunted. My stomach twisted. Even now, even after everything I had learned, I still felt it. The pull of the deception. The brilliance of the lie. I understood why so many would fall. It would not feel like damnation. It would feel like comfort. Then I saw myself, not as I had been, but as I could have been. A man who had chosen differently. A man who had turned away before it was too late, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the weight of what I had lost, the life I had thrown away, the souls I had dragged down with me. It was unbearable. You must choose, he said again, And I realized there was no middle ground. There never had been. I had spent my life rejecting the idea of absolutes, believing that morality was a construct, that good and evil were perspectives, that truth was malleable. But now, faced with the source of all truth, I knew how foolish I had been. There was only one truth, and everything else was a distortion. I wanted to say yes, I wanted to fall at his feet and beg for redemption, but something inside me hesitated. Fear. Not of him, not of punishment, but of what it would mean. To choose him would mean rejecting everything I had built, everything I had believed, every part of my identity that had defined me. It would mean facing the people I had led into darkness and admitting that I had been wrong. It would mean suffering. He did not speak again. He did not need to. The choice was mine to make, freely, without coercion, without force. I thought of the laughter in the void. I thought of the things that had torn at me, that had waited for me with open mouths and grasping hands. I thought of the people I had deceived, the ones still walking toward the edge of the abyss, unaware of what awaited them. I had spent my life believing I knew the answers. Now, I knew nothing. But I knew one thing. I deserve another chance. My own voice startled me. I had not expected to be able to speak, to find my words in his presence. I can never undo what I've done. He did not argue. He did not tell me I was wrong. But he did not turn away. And that, more than anything, was what broke me. I fell to my knees, and I made my choice. I gasped for air, but it was like breathing through shattered glass. My lungs burned, my chest convulsed, and every nerve in my body screamed as if I had been ripped from somewhere I wasn't supposed to leave. I wasn't just waking up. I was being forced back into existence, slammed into my own flesh like a soul shoved into a broken vessel. My vision blurred, flickering between the stark white light of the hospital room and something else, something deeper, something that still clung to me like unseen chains. Voices swam around me, frantic, disbelieving, teetering between awe and terror. "He's awake," the voice came from my right, sharp, edged with something close to panic. I tried to move, but my limbs felt foreign, my fingers numb, my body sluggish like I was still halfway between two worlds. I barely registered the hands pressing against me, holding me down. More voices followed, overlapping, tangled in shock. "That's impossible." His heart. There was no, "Get the doctor now!" I saw it myself. I signed the... They stopped. Someone in the room gasped. A tray clattered to the floor. The beeping of the monitors accelerated as if the machines themselves were trying to process the impossible. I tried to speak, but my throat was raw, dry, like it had been burned from the inside out. My mind fought against the fog, clawing its way back to consciousness, forcing itself to remember. I had died. I knew I had. I had felt the cold hands dragging me down, had heard the laughter in the void, had stood before the presence that unraveled my entire existence. I had seen the truth, made my choice, and yet I was here. Somehow I was here. I turned my head slowly, muscles stiff, body aching in ways that had nothing to do with the physical world. A nurse stood near the foot of my bed, frozen in place, her face pale, eyes wide with something beyond shock. It was fear. Not the fear of losing a patient, not the fear of medical failure. This was something deeper, primal, the kind of fear that roots itself in the soul. I pushed myself upright, every movement a battle against the heaviness pressing into my limbs. The doctors around me hesitated, uncertain whether to restrain me or step back. "Where am I?" My voice was barely more than a whisper, hoarse, strained. No one answered. They only stared, waiting for an explanation that none of them could give. "You shouldn't be here." The doctor closest to me, a man in his 50s with tired eyes and shaking hands, spoke in a voice so low it was almost a whisper. He wasn't talking to himself. He wasn't talking to the staff. He was talking to me. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed, my bare feet touching the cold tile floor, grounding me, forcing me to accept that this was real. My body still carried the weight of death, a heaviness that had settled into my bones, something that would never leave me. I was different now. I could feel it. The way the air around me seemed thicker, the way every movement felt like it carried unseen resistance. I had walked too far into the dark, seen too much, and now the world would never feel the same again. A nurse stepped forward, reaching for my arm as if she might stop me. "You need to rest," she said, but there was hesitation in her voice, as if she was afraid to touch me. I looked at her, truly looked, and I saw it. Just for a moment. A flicker in the air behind her, something shifting just outside the reach of the hospital lights. A shape where there should have been none, a presence where there should have been emptiness. Watching. A cold dread crept up my spine. They knew. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stand. The nurse stepped back, unsure whether to stop me or let me go. The doctors were still whispering among themselves, looking at the monitors, at their notes, at each other, but none of them dared to look at me. They didn't understand what had happened. They thought it was a medical anomaly, a failure of their instruments, a mistake in paperwork. They didn't know that death had already claimed me. They didn't know that something had pulled me back. I turned toward the door. And then I felt it. It wasn't the cold sterility of the hospital air. It wasn't the quiet hum of machines or the distant chatter of nurses in the hallway. It was something else. Something just behind me, just beyond the edge of perception. I swallowed, my throat still raw, and turned my head slightly. A shadow stood in the corner of the room. No, not a shadow, a presence. It wasn't like before. It wasn't the things I had once called upon, the spirits I had believed I controlled. Those had always answered with amusement, with deception, with hunger. But this was different. Silent. Watching. Something that had followed me back from the other side. Something that was not pleased. I forced myself to keep walking, pushing forward, gripping the edges of the doorframe as I stepped into the dimly lit hospital corridor. The world outside my hospital room felt wrong, slightly out of sync, as if reality itself was struggling to accept my presence. The shadows along the walls stretched a little too far. The flickering bulbs overhead cast light that felt just a little too cold. I knew I had been given a second chance, but I also knew that the things I had served, the forces I had given my life to, were not going to let me go so easily. I stepped outside into the night, the cold air shocking against my skin. The city hummed around me, oblivious to what had just happened, to the war that was raging beyond what human eyes could see. Cars rolled by, people walked the streets, laughing, talking, completely unaware that the balance had shifted, that something had broken. I stood on the pavement, looking up at the sky, at the stars that now felt so much farther away than before. And then I felt it again, a pull, not from the light, not from him, but from the darkness. They were still watching. I had made my choice, but they were not done with me yet. The world was the same, but I was not. I walked through the city, past the blinking neon signs, past the crowds lost in their own thoughts, past the endless hum of life continuing as if nothing had happened. But I knew the truth. I had seen what lay beneath the thin veil of reality. I had seen what was coming. The people around me, laughing, scrolling through their phones, arguing over meaningless things, they had no idea how close they stood to the edge. I tried to tell them. At first I thought it would be simple. The truth burned inside me, clawing at my throat, demanding to be spoken. But the moment I opened my mouth, I saw it. The resistance, the dismissal, the quiet smirk of disbelief curling at the corners of their lips. Some humored me, nodding along as if I were just another lunatic on the street, preaching about the end of the world. Others grew angry, offended by the mere suggestion that everything they believed was a lie. And then there were the ones who didn't say anything at all, the ones who just stared, their eyes too dark, their faces too still, watching, recognizing me. The message I had been given was not meant to be accepted, it was meant to be ignored, ridiculed, erased. And so, piece by piece, the world tried to bury me. My name, once whispered with reverence in the circles of power I had moved through, became a joke. My former followers, the ones who had once hung on my every word, turned against me with a fervor that frightened even them. The platforms I'd tried to use to spread what I had seen were shut down. My words labeled as madness, my warnings dismissed as hysteria. My entire past, Every trace of my influence, every book I had written, every recording of my teachings, all of it was stripped away as if I had never existed. But they knew, the ones in the shadows, the ones I had once served, they had not forgotten me, they had not forgiven me, and they did not need chains to keep me silent. They only needed doubt. It started slowly, a whisper in the back of my mind, a creeping uncertainty. Had I imagined it? Had my death been nothing more than a hallucination, a fevered dream conjured by a failing brain? Had I truly stood before him, or was it simply the delusions of a man desperate for redemption? The world did not change. The sky did not split open. There were no angels in the streets, no demons clawing at the walls, just silence. And yet, the shadows still stretched a little too far. The cold still lingered in places where it shouldn't. The feeling of being watched never truly left me. I do not know how much time I have left. Every night, the dreams come. The laughter from the void. The hands reaching for me. The things I left behind, waiting, patient, hungry. I know they will try to take me again. Perhaps they will succeed. But if you are hearing this, if my words have somehow reached you, then that means there is still time. You don't have to believe me. I wouldn't have believed myself not so long ago. But when your time comes, when you feel the weight of the unseen pressing against you, when you hear the voices whispering from the dark, remember this: you were given a choice long before you knew you had one. The world is not what it seems, and when you finally see the truth, when you stand at the threshold and realize what waits on the other side, I hope, for your sake, that you chose wisely.